Welcome to Back to the Heart. I have a guest here that has come into my life through a couple of different communities that I'm in. I'm always talking about how important community is. Been part of the Danny Morell's Awaken You community and Mark England's and Lifted community. So I'm excited to continue to merge these beautiful communities together that have been part of my healing journey. So I have Ryan Sprague here, who is going to help us dive into plant medicine. It's been incredibly powerful in my healing journey, so I wanted to share it with the Back to the Heart listeners. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Amanda. I'm so excited to be here with you today to talk about a lot of my favorite subjects because what you just mentioned right there with community, I mean, that's been the number one secret superpower in my life is I really found out that life really is all about who you know. And a gentleman you mentioned, Mark England, who runs Unlifted, was a pivotal part of my journey. We can get into that if you want, but I'm super excited to be here to bring the audience to church when it comes to conscious cannabis, blowing the lid on all these myths and all these things that go along with cannabis and all the propaganda that's been wrongly associated with it and all the projections that people put upon it. It makes me lazy, it makes me anxious, et cetera, et cetera. So really excited to dive in.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, let's jump right in and maybe let's talk about the story and the history of cannabis and all humanity and how we got to where it is today and all of the likely misconceptions that a lot of people out there have and maybe a lot of the listeners.
Yeah, great question. So one of the things that blows a lot of people's minds right at the bat is the fact that cannabis being used as a spiritual medicine, as an intoxicant, not as hemp fiber, not as textile use, but as an intoxicating spiritual plant medicine, has been utilized for over 10,000 years. And authors such as Chris Bennett have dictated this, and they have all the research out there. So for anyone who's a history buff and really wants to dive into a lot more than we could share here. Chris Bennett is amazing at that, but he has tracked cannabis back over to about 8,000 BC, and he's found cannabis in every area of the planet, which is very interesting. I mean, if you go to the Dogon tribe in Africa, they have a very interesting story of cannabis being brought here by dog people from the Sirius star system, Sirius B. If you go to the Scythians and like all of those people, they used to create rituals where they essentially created the hot box. The Scythians used to create a makeshift teepee. They would take hot stones, throw them inside the teepee, and throw pounds upon pounds of cannabis on these hot stones, and then close the teepee and just sit inside and laugh like hyenas, so to say. And then if you go into China, there was an interesting fellow who was found. He was living around 3 to 4,000 BC, and they have a certain name for him. I forget exactly what his name and what they named him, but he was found with archery equipment, and he was also found with other items that would dictate that he was a shaman from that time. And one of the things he was found with was around 800 grams of cannabis. And the cannabis was so well preserved that they could do radiocarbon testing on it. And when they did that, they found there was a high THC content. So that was abnormal for that time based on like the type of hemp and things like that that were growing around that area. So it was determined that because he had that cannabis at a high THC, he was utilizing it for spiritual purposes. But it gets even better than that. In about 2015, Chris Bennett went to a famous ritual site in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem. And they were doing excavations and they found this very sacred temple site. I believe one of the holy of holies, if you will, is what they referred to it in that culture. And so there's a certain area in these places, because, again, they found multiple of these places, and they found a certain residue of frankincense mixed with not only cannabis, but animal dung. And that was a very interesting thing to find because during that time, the way that hash was going around the Silk Road, and this is kind of gross, but they would mix it with animal dung. So that was for an intoxicating purpose. So when they found that residue there, there's some other evidence too they found there, but that was like, oh wow, they were definitely using this for a psychedelic purpose. It wasn't, textiles, it wasn't paper. It was actually using it for a spiritual use. And that's something that for a long time, people have said, well, sure, cannabis and hemp have been here for thousands of years, but The only reason people used them was for textile. And even if you look into the history of America, hemp was at one time so valued in the original Jamestown colony that it was required by law that you had to grow hemp. Now, really,
Oh,
what happened as the dark ages in America with cannabis started was after a while, we moved forward from the 16 and 1700s. We have a gentleman by the name of William O'Shaughnessy that came over to the States and started working with cannabis as a medicine. And so by the early 1900s, cannabis was a part of over 80% of all medications on the market, which was pretty fascinating, honestly, if you think about it. Because again, like we're only talking now about 100 years ago. It's different. We're talking about 8,000 BC, but now we're talking about 100 years ago where cannabis was a part of over 80% of all medications on the market. So doctors knew what it was. Clients knew what it was. People knew what cannabis sativa was. Now, what happened was around the 20s, getting into the 30s, right around 1935, there were three guys that came together, and this is the conspiracy, if you will. And to me, it makes perfect sense. There's never been fact checked on this, but it makes perfect sense if you understand how we do anything is how we do everything. And at the same time, how these same things are happening today. So there was this guy named Andrew Mellon who owned the world's biggest journalism empire at that time. He pretty much owned all the newspapers at that time. So we already know what happens with CNN and Fox and whatnot. They have certain narratives, and if you only watch one of those channels, you only get that one narrative. Well, imagine if the same person owned all of them and there was only one narrative happening. That was how it was back in the 1920s and 1930s. There was no internet. People didn't really travel far from their home. There wasn't a lot of connection like there is today. I mean, there was in your local communities and stuff. But today we can go on the internet, we can fact check stuff, and still we have a lot of propaganda and misinformation. So imagine what it was like back then. So we have this guy, Andrew Mellon, that owns the world's biggest journalism empire. Then we have William Randolph Hearst, who is also an investor, and he did some other things as well. And he also had vested interests in nylon, cotton, and other textile industries. That was his main thing. And then we have a gentleman by the name of Harry Anslinger, who went on to become the first head of the DEA. Now, I believe it was Andrew Mellon's uncle was Harry Anslinger's boss. And so what happened was, as all of these guys got together, William Randolph Hearst was like, hey, wait a minute. If hemp keeps getting as big as it's going to be, my industries are going to take a big hit. So they cut essentially a deal between the three of them, so the story goes, to be able to have Andrew Mellon talk about cannabis and create the reefer madness narrative that we now know well. And Harry Anslinger ends up becoming the first head of the DEA. It was called something else at first. I forget the name off the top of my head, but he essentially became one of the people that was the biggest proponents against cannabis. Now, they didn't call it cannabis at this time. When they launched this whole campaign, they decided, you know what? What's going to scare people? And what I'm about to say, Amanda, and for any of your listeners, is nothing I believe. I'm just going to repeat what they said because I want people to know how insanely racist the propaganda around cannabis started as and still in a big part is today. So basically, they formed a whole hypothesis that they could create a myth, essentially, that there was this new plant down in Mexico called marijuana, and that Mexican men were coming over the border and raping white women with this medicine called marijuana that had never been seen before. So they created this entire smear campaign called Reefer Madness, where some of the quotes from that movie are hysterical in today's world. One of them is a man could grow enough cannabis in a window box to have the whole town running after each other with hatchets, hatcheting each other to death. Right? Like, I mean, just things that literally are the farthest thing from cannabis that I can't help but giggle. But back then, it was pretty serious. They were coming out and saying these kind of things. So they went to the law bodies overnight, essentially, and were like, hey, there's this new plant. And the law bodies were like, well, shouldn't we wait? And they were like, no, did you hear us? White women are getting raped. And so basically, they made marijuana illegal overnight. And in the morning, all these doctors woke up and were like, wait a minute, they made what illegal? And they realized it was cannabis. But then what they did was they said, hey, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. We know you guys use it for medications. We know there's some uses for it. So we're going to create a tax stamp act. This was the Marijuana Tax Stamp Act of 1937. And so what happened was the deal was, hey, if you bring your cannabis to us, right, all the cannabis you have, the hemp you have, et cetera, If you bring it to this essentially like a town office, we're going to give you tax stamps and then you're going to be able to grow it for certain purposes. So then people were like, okay, great. They take all their cannabis, they bring it to the place, and they arrest them because they don't have any tax stamps. And people are like, well, wait a minute. You told us to come here to get the tax stamps. Spoiler alert, the tax stamps were never given out, and it was just a way for them to put people in jail. And one of my biggest theories on cannabis specifically, and a lot of different, I mean, statutory realm laws, is that when slavery got made illegal, it didn't really get made illegal because then private prisons were created. So, what can you do when someone's smoking a plant that helps their endocannabinoid system, the largest regulatory system in their body, find homeostasis? Because maybe they're interacting with chemicals in their environment or whatever, and they're getting dysregulated. So, they find cannabis, it helps. And now, if they get caught, they get put in jail and they can get charged 30 cents a day to make soap or whatever it is at this private prison. So, when we start looking into these kind of things, it's nefarious, nefarious, nefarious. And it's really just a complete smear campaign, propaganda. One of the other things, too, in more recent history that people may not understand, because I'll have someone every week, someone random send me a message on Instagram saying, what do you think about this new study that cannabis affects frontal lobe development or cannabis causes heart disease or any of these things that we see? And we need not look further than Peter Grinspoon's new book called Seeing Through the Smoke. He's a Harvard MD. His dad was Lester Grinspoon, wrote Marijuana Rediscovered in 1971. He was best friends with Carl Sagan, and he was also a Harvard MD. And so these are very smart people based on the centralized institutions of education. And Peter, in his book, talks about how you actually, what the funding looks like in America for cannabis. So something people don't know is that if you want to study cannabis in this country, say you are at Stanford or you're undergrad or whatever, and you want to get funding to study this plant, you will only get approved for funding if you're looking to find a detrimental effect in this plant. Let me say that again. You'll only get funding if you're looking to find a negative. Now, let's say that you're looking to find the negative and you get your funding. What cannabis do you have to use for this study that you're conducting? Do you go to a dispensary? Can you grow it your own? No, you have to get it from the University of Mississippi. And Peter has nicknamed the strain that you get from them the moldy mush strain. This makes Mexican brickweed look like the best cannabis you've ever seen. When people get it, it's typically been freeze dried for 5 years. It's full of seeds, sticks, stems, and mold and mildew and botrytis, which is bud rot. And that's what you're supposed to use to study to have to find a detrimental effect on cannabis. And we wonder why so many studies we see from this country are negative. It's not because cannabis is actually causing those things. It's because the institutions that do these studies, Stanford, Harvard, any of these places, are funded in big part by pharmaceutical industries. And you need not look,
Surprise!
yeah, exactly. And
Again, hello,
yeah,
people.
it's so crazy. And, at the end of the day, incentives dictate outcomes.
Yeah.
So if these researchers are going to get kickbacks for finding negatives, then guess what's going to get found? Negatives, because most people are motivated by self-centered things, right? Finding money. And also a lot of people are just very asleep in the world and aren't able to critically think. And they're also part of an institution. So they feel like they're part of a community and they don't want to go against it. So it's a multifaceted challenge. But that's why I tell everyone, you need not look farther than the results people are getting. You go down to the Rastafarian culture, some of those kids are smoking at 8 years old. Now, do I recommend that? No. But what I'm saying is it's a very good study on if cannabis was that dangerous. Don't you think those people would have gone extinct a long time ago? Don't you think human beings in general wouldn't be here? I mean, we've been connecting with this plant all around the world for 10,000
Yeah.
years, and all that's happened is our consciousness has continued to rise. So I just don't see the correlation equaling causation whatsoever when it comes to any of this detrimental stuff around cannabis.
Right. I mean, they're putting kids on ADHD medication at 8.
So silly.
You know what I
Like,
mean? Like that. I see what you're saying. You're like, oh, I'm not saying, okay, you should start doing this with your children, but
mm,
people are drugging their children,
yeah, putting them
medicating
on
them.
meth.
Yeah, they're medicating them at an early age because of, all those reasons that you said, the
Hmm.
pharmaceutical industry and not getting to what is the root of the problem, but what's the quick fix that is acceptable to make money.
Hmm. Because the top core value of this country, anyway, is productivity. And you need not look farther than like, why do we have fast food? Because
Exactly.
something else is more important, you know? So again, like we look at like what they really like, pat us on the back for, it's productivity. So the entire sick care system is built on what's going to get you back to making us tax dollars as fast as possible. And that's the thing that, the thing that you called forward there is very important. It's like, listen, there's harm reduction with anything in the world. You don't want to drink a gallon of water in 15 minutes, right? You can drown
Yeah.
yourself in that, okay? So I'm not sitting here saying cannabis is perfect. There's no harm reduction. You can just smoke it all day, whatever, right? But what I am saying is, like you said, realize that for anyone listening who's feeling maybe a little triggered around this or a little like, oh, maybe they're feeling that programming coming up around cannabis, realize they're putting 8-year-olds on fucking Adderall. They're putting kids on meth. They're putting kids on SSRIs that completely annihilate your neurochemistry. These things are already happening. That's the real bad guy here. Does
Yeah.
nature make mistakes? Is a question I like to ask often. Jack Cruz asks it often, and I love it. Because the common underlying unconscious belief of humanity is we can do it better than nature did. And you need not look further than the pharmaceutical industry to see that because you know what a lot of pharmaceuticals roots are? They're plants. They come from plants. So what they do is they outlaw the natural, they demonize the natural to monopolize on the synthetic. And then they give it back to you as if this is the best way to do it. But what do we know about things in isolation? They don't work like that. Nothing in nature works in isolation. Everything works in a communal factor. And so at the end of the day, I would much rather trust a natural plant created by God than some random pill created by some dark ass pharmaceutical company, the same type of companies that just poisoned half the world over the last 4 years. It's like
Right.
I've been in cannabis long enough that I've seen cannabis curing cancer in people, which again might be something that triggers a lot of people and it's like, oh my God, he's going there. But I recommend anyone don't believe what I say. Go on Phoenix Tears, go on PubMed, and look up THC's role in killing cancer cells. Look up CBD's role in inhibiting cancer cell growth. I was seeing this stuff in 2011. I helped my father through the end of his life with cancer, and I got to see cannabis really support him during that time. And then I also got to see my friends get their doors kicked in for giving out RSO, Rick Simpson oil, or essentially like the type of medicine people use for cancer treatment. And so since I was, 18, I've realized these people that say they're out for our best interests are not because results don't lie. You think you find a natural cure to cancer that doesn't have to burn something out of someone's body. You think that'd be the biggest discovery ever. When they try to stamp that down, I was fortunate that experience happened because the last 4 years I was like, yeah, spade's a spade, a spade. When the second the government says they care about you, run the other way.
Yeah,
It's a big
for
thing.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Tell us a little bit about your experience with your father whenever he had cancer and how he was able to experience cannabis and what it did for him and you too.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. I love talking about this because, I joke, but it's not a joke, but I joke with people that, my dad was a big goofball, and that's where I get it from. And every time I get to tell a story, I get to keep him alive, and people that never got to meet him get to kind of meet him in a way. They get to understand kind of the energy of him and stuff. And so my dad and I were always very close. My mom too. Absolutely amazing parents. Could not have possibly asked for a better childhood. No, nothing's perfect, but I had literally the best childhood. And now working with people as a coach for the last 7 years, hearing a lot of stories, it just made me appreciate my parents that much more and the level of dedication they took to not only take care of me, but take care of all my friends whose parents were not maybe the best in the town and whatnot. So in 2014, my dad got diagnosed with cancer, and him and I had both been going to cannabis school together. He ended up joining with me when I wanted to go just to hang out and, see what it was all about. He wasn't a cannabis user. He had smoked like one joint in the 80s and got paranoid, and that was it for him. He just liked being sober. So, he went with me and he just loved that this was something that I loved. And we ended up beginning to grow together right before I started going to cannabis school. And it was a really fun father-son project. His business took a big hit in the recession of 2008. So eventually I convinced him that he needed a good hobby. I'm like, you need a good hobby, Dad. You should buy us a grow kit. And so eventually he did it and he bought us a kit. And so in 2014, after I've been going to the school for a while, learning about regenerative agriculture and things of that nature, he gets diagnosed with terminal cancer. He had been having some pains and things like that. And I kept telling him, go to the doctor and figure out what's going on anyway. And my dad wasn't exactly the healthiest person. He loved soda, he loved subs, he loved cigarettes. So it was just one of those things where, like, hey, no judgment, but those things are going to add up over time. He was also a very stressed individual a lot of the time. He had a lot of weight in his shoulders, and so those things create a perfect storm. So he started having some pain, kept putting it off, kept putting it off. And apparently, when I was in Vegas, I was out there at a music festival. He decided to go to the doctor finally and get it checked out. By the time he got the scans back, he realized, uh-oh, the doctors told him you have stage 4. It's like all throughout your brain, your lungs, your lymph nodes, everything. So I knew from that point forward, he was probably too far into his diagnosis for RSO or anything that I had learned in the last couple of years to save his life. But and also the other thing too was he didn't want to quit smoking and doing all the things that contributed to getting cancer in the first place. So I had a fork in the road moment where I realized I could either love my dad for the man he always was, a loving father, but not the healthiest, or I could try to change him into who I thought he should be, so maybe I could keep him around longer and in a selfish way, but potentially kill his quality of life, as this was going to be the end of his life. So fortunately, I chose the first way. And after a couple of weeks after he was diagnosed, he started experiencing some pretty severe pain. And so I, talked to him about trying RSO. I was like, listen, I know that you don't like being altered of any sort, but this pain's getting pretty intense and I think this would help you. And so we decided to take our last harvest that we ever grew together and turn it into RSO, which again is Rick Simpson oil. That's the acronym. And I started administering it to him. And what I thought would happen, Amanda, is that I thought that maybe he would need help to the bathroom or he would have questions that I would answer. So I would sit with him. I thought it was a very left brain quantitative thing. And what ended up really happening was that even though I had known my father obviously my whole life, we had done a lot of stuff together. I was an only child. My dad did have some other children from previous marriages that I got along great with, but I lived in the house alone with him and my mom. And so I really thought I had this guy figured out totally. Like, you got no surprises for me, Dad. But when this medicine hit him the first time, I started seeing a totally different version of my father come out. One that was way more childlike, one that was way more infinite, is how I would describe it in words of today. One that was way more curious about life, death, questions about these things than he had ever had been before. And I remember during that time that we got to have so many deep conversations that I didn't realize at the time, but were creating closure for me. And when he was diagnosed in July 9th of 2014, he was given about 3 months if he was lucky. I didn't know that at the time. They were like, Harry, you'll be lucky to make it to Halloween. Now, he didn't tell me that. We started him on the RSO right around the third week of July, and he ended up surviving until the following June. And so, when he was getting his scans back, his tumors were still there. They were still growing because he was still doing all the things that were giving him cancer, but they had slowed their growth dramatically. He had small cell carcinoma, so it was a very aggressive cancer. It was moving very fast before that. His uncle on the other, or sorry, my uncle on the other hand had large cell carcinoma, so I got to see kind of how they differed. My uncle had it for like 4 or 5 years. My dad, within a matter of months, was, feeling it. And so as we were getting his scans back, his tumors are slowing their growth a lot. And of course, Dana-Farber in Boston, they were getting a lot of people that were from the cannabis school I went to, and they were always perplexed. They would always tell them it's cannabis, and they're like, no, it's not. So they asked my dad, what are you doing? Like, how are you? Whoa, what are you? And he's like, it's cannabis. And they're like, no, it can't be. And they must have been so perplexed because there was no information out about it at that time except just hearsay and word of mouth information. But he ended up surviving until the following June. And during that time, we got to have all those conversations. And, I started to realize that whatever I had just experienced with cannabis was way past just the physical medicinal value, the ability of it to help you relax. Like, I understood those things. I understood the quantitative aspects of cannabis and what it could do for the human experience, but I didn't realize it was a spiritual medicine until I had that experience. And after that was when I worked at the dispensary because I was hell-bent on figuring out what the hell just happened. And I couldn't find any literature about it. I could understand the science, the history, the pharmacology, the cultivation, but I couldn't find anything on what I would now describe as the spiritual side of cannabis. And it wouldn't be for another 5 years that I really tapped into creating the courses and everything that I do now. But I'll stop there just in case you have any questions about that part.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear the story of the propaganda that was used, and maybe this story is able to come to light and more people to see it for what it is now than maybe would have 5 years ago,
Yeah.
because they are now starting, a lot more people are starting to wake up and see, huh, I think what this guy's saying about the media and the pharmaceutical connection, huh? There may be
Hmm.
something to that. This conspiracy, quote unquote,
Hmm.
may actually be some truth in that. That word, if you have a label of conspiracy, it's probably
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, no, it's probably truth in disguise. It'll be true and,
Yeah.
socially accepted in about 5 years.
Yeah, if the overall plan and agenda doesn't match with what you're saying, it's automatically going to be categorized as conspiracy and the
Hmm.
crazy talk or the reefer madness and create
Hmm.
whatever story. And what a powerful story to create. I had an experience with a friend of mine who has this beautiful farm up in Raleigh, Haven Farms, where they grow and they have these beautiful events and have ceremonies and sound baths and meditations and men's groups and all this great stuff for humanity. And I was talking to her last summer about my experiences with cannabis. And at the time, it was just still like weed, you know? She told me I really honor and respect this plant. And I thought, wow, like even just the term weed, what we describe as humans is something that grows everywhere, which you've already
Hmm.
said, right? This
Hmm.
does grow everywhere. However, a weed is usually associated with something that you don't want. What do you want to
Hmm.
do in your flower garden? What do you want to do in your vegetable garden? You want to remove the weeds, the things that
Hmm.
are unwanted, the dirty, the bad things, the things that don't matter, that are just whatever. It feels uncomfortable when I hear people say weed even now. I mean, obviously I'm saying it in the description, but um, I just learned such a new found respect for this beautiful feminine plant. And it's incredible how much this feminine plant responds to us. And like you said, it's like what I've learned about the plant is that she responds, and whatever you ask for, she will give it. And if
Hmm.
you're looking just to relax, you will just relax.
Yeah.
You know, if you think that you're going to just get sleepy, you're probably going to get sleepy. If
Yeah.
you think you're going to get anxious or paranoid, you're probably going to get anxious or paranoid. It's
Hmm.
really works so similar to our subconscious. Like that's why this whole thing with Mark and the words are so powerful. Like our subconscious doesn't understand. I don't want to get sick. All I heard was sick,
Hmm.
you know, so if you change that, like I am healthy is so much different than I don't want to be sick. So
Hmm.
it's like this whole thing with the cannabis, it just feels like whatever you put out there, that's what you're going to receive. And that's been a big part of my journey too, was looking at this beautiful plant with intention. And sometimes the intention might just be to relax.
Yeah,
So
and that's okay.
and that's okay. Exactly. You know, and so many people maybe have it as a distraction, as a numbing feature, which is not necessarily great, but it provides an opportunity for you to look into yourself and see why is it that I'm reaching for this in a state of numbing, you know?
Definitely.
And I know that that can be a thing, but gosh, I mean, all of the other benefits that are out there, if you're reaching for something to numb, it's much safer than the alcohol that we've been like talk about propaganda with
Hmm.
alcohol. I mean, are you celebrating? Are you sad? It's your birthday, it's a wedding, it's a baby shower,
Someone just
literally. I mean,
died, someone was just born.
everything. It's where's the champagne? Let's pop a top. That's really what's sad is that that's become such a normalized part of our society. And then
Yeah.
this, which actually you don't want to use anything that's going to just be for the purpose of numbing all the
Yeah,
time and distracting.
exactly.
But with this, it's like there are at least so many other beautiful properties that are available for
Definitely.
cannabis.
Well, I mean, the cool thing is too that even with cannabis, you can only numb for so long before the plant will just check you. So it's kind of built into it that
Yes.
like someone could be smoking for 4 years, 5 years, smoking all day, whatever, and then boom, they just have a panic attack one day. And it's the plant showing them like, hey, look within. Because that's, I think, really why the plant is here. If we can amalgamate it all down into one purpose, it's to help us realize the power we have. Like you were saying, when you say, I don't want to get sick, so many of us state things in negation, right? I don't want this. It's like, okay, what do you want? And that's one of my favorite things to do as a coach is when people are like, well, I don't like this about my partner. I don't like that. I'm like, oh, what do you like about them? And they're like, and I'm like, why is it so hard to find things that we do want, that we do like, right? So when you
Yeah.
connect with cannabis intentionally and you know how to utilize it in this way, you can say, I don't want to be sick. I want to be healthy. And you can feel the difference that it feels like in your body when you say those things. Because one of the things that most people don't recognize today is that even those of us that meditate and try to do all the right things, we're around a lot of energetics, a lot of electrical things, 5G, radio waves, loud cars, all these things ramp up our nervous system to an insane degree. And so, because of that, we can't really feel the subtleties that all of these things are doing to us. Cannabis is a way to be able to access that without having to go to a cabin in the woods in the middle of nowhere for a week and a half to 2 weeks and just meditate. Because you can get there without it, 100%. That's what the plan is here to show you too, is to reteach you how to, get to these places. But the challenge is that I bet if everyone listening right now, if I said, hey, do you have all the time in the world and all the money to go rent a cabin for 2 weeks and just do nothing? Like, have all your meals delivered to you and just sit in lotus pose for 2 weeks? I bet 90% of people would say no. And I bet the other 5% would probably say, probably not. And then maybe 3 to 5% would say, yeah, maybe, But then out of that 3 to 5%, how many are actually going to go do that? Because we're stuck in a very interesting time of instant gratification. So the ability of someone to sit still like that for a week and a half, 2 weeks is almost impossible. So basically, what cannabis does is help you tune into those subtleties and start to realize how important these things are and start working on them. So it's like cannabis gives us a way to have our cake and eat it too. I don't think technology is inherently bad. I don't think any of this is inherently bad, but it's important to understand what it is doing to us on a physiological level so we can counteract that with things such as biogeometry, the necklaces I wear for that, cannabis to be able to tap deeply into the subtle layers of your reality to see how are the words that I'm utilizing affecting my energy, what are the stories I'm creating, what emotions are seeming like they are very challenging for me to move through, which ones feel easy to move through. How am I speaking to those around me? How am I being treated? Like cannabis gives you an opportunity to just drop right into that place.
Yeah.
And if you know what to do there and you spend an hour, even once a week, if you want to do it every day, it's, again, I'm not here to say what's right or wrong, but when you do that and you meditate or you do breath work with it, you'll get these ideas. And when you go out and integrate them, you start to create a state of being where you're high all the time on your own supply. And that's, I think, what cannabis is here to remind us. It's here as a teacher, and the lessons never stop. But in order to actually make it worthwhile, we must be learning the lessons. I mean, again, I'm not going to say we must at the same time because everyone's got their own free will. But for me, it got to a point where I was realizing that the whole numb out and just forget my life lesson, yeah, I was done with that a long time ago. But I didn't know anything else existed because the only depictions of cannabis in media and programs, etc., are either it's a dangerous drug and it's going to rot your brain or Cheech and Chong Pineapple Express. So that's the
Right.
only capitulation we've seen of it. So of course, most people will look like that with it because we've never got a user manual for the plant. We've had to keep it in secret. We've had to kind of like keep it in code with each other. So of course we're all winging it at best, but that's not a fault of the plant. And I feel like the plant's been blamed for so much stuff. Mexican men raping white women, which is ridiculous. Once again, I do not believe that. Like this reefer madness bullshit, the DEA bullshit. Even now, the Andrew Huberman, cannabis is going to affect your brain bullshit that's created by pharmaceutical companies that fund these institutions. It's just no matter where you look, this plant is getting stepped on and being the bad guy for humanity's lack of ability to take accountability and ownership over their own emotions, their own experience, and their own either ability or lack thereof to take action on the things that matter to them in life. That's the real challenge. And it's easier to use a scapegoat like cannabis. It's just cannabis's fault. But the truth is,
Yeah.
it's your fault, not you, but figuratively.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to share about how it has helped me. I
Mm.
think whenever I actually had never even been around it and never even tried it until about, I guess, probably 5 or 6 years ago,
Oh,
which feels
cool.
like amazing that I've made like into, almost 40 years old before I'd ever even tried it. And at the time, whenever I first was experimenting and trying it, it was more of a relaxation, kind of helping me release some of my anxiety.
Yeah.
And then in the last like year, honestly, since I had that conversation with my friend Leslie and started looking at it with more of intention and focus, then it seriously changed everything. I have all of these ideas and all this stuff that is going on inside my head, like all the time, like
Mm,
literally everybody.
mm,
And for me personally, whenever I would have that intention, I started out with show me the way,
mm.
like as simple as possible. And
Yeah.
whatever it was that I was trying to address, and whenever I did that or still do that now, it's like it brings I have like the beginning of this idea over here, and the middle of this idea is here, and then two or three parts of this other idea over here. And whenever I would like show me the way and bring me back into this space, and sit, maybe with a meditation or even hell, adding breath work to it, it's incredibly
Mm,
powerful. It's like I'm putting on my pair of glasses when I smoke, even just a tiny bit,
mm.
and it clears up all of the fog. And I'm able to put the actual pieces together. And I'm like, oh my God, this is great. All these ideas, and everything becomes so much more clear for me instead of this bouncing around all these different pieces and parts of the ideas that get, like you said, are clouded by all the energies and the frequencies and all those things around us.
It's so amazing, and that's exactly how I look at it too. It's like, a lot of us, we come into this world, we're never taught about emotional regulation, emotional awareness, any of the stuff that actually matters, mindset, spiritual development. We're taught about the Pythagorean theorem, some random version of history that's completely
Yeah.
inaccurate. The thing that cannabis does is it helps you just reorient to more of what the natural human experience is meant to be like. It brings you into awareness of these emotions in your body and also where in your body they are.
Yeah.
It also allows you to be more present with them because you're getting into an alpha and theta brainwave state. The theta waves open up the subconscious, which is where all of your limiting beliefs, unconscious stories, and anything either helping you or hindering you, all of it is in your subconscious. So the main thing that I talk about all the time is the fact that people are like, "Oh, well, you shouldn't need cannabis for that." That's like me saying you shouldn't need to take a plane to go to California. It's like, yeah, you could walk, but that would be pretty silly, right? Like if time was the most
Yeah.
valuable resource in this experience we call life, if time was the most valuable resource and I get good results doing something that helps me move through time in a faster pace, I'm going to take that bet every single time. The amount of ability for me to connect with cannabis and go through my own coaching and therapeutic exercises did years worth of therapy in a couple of months. And that's what we keep seeing over and over and over again at Breathe with Cannabis in all the programs I run. We literally, the first week of the Breathe with Cannabis Limitless program, a woman commented in the Telegram chat. She said, "Guys, I learned more about myself and moved more energy yesterday in 2.5 hours than 20 years of combined therapy, healing retreats, Reiki, all the other things." Now, I'm not here to discount those things. I'm not here to say the cannabis is better than those things, but I'm here to allow cannabis to rise back into the conversation with these other modalities where it rightfully belongs, just like it has been doing for over 10,000 years for the human experience, reminding us of what we've forgotten when we've forgotten it, because we don't know what we don't know when we've forgotten it. It's in the unconscious. And that un part means you won't know it's there. So, again, at the end of the day, results don't lie. That's the number one thing I go back to. When I connect with cannabis and I move through these things, I feel really good. I feel better. And so, no matter if Andrew Huberman or the pharmaceutical industries, whatever, try to tell me it's going to hurt this, it's going to hurt that, the results speak for themselves. I'm able to sit here and have a conversation, have word recall, memory retention, etc. I'm able to serve in the highest degree possible. I'm able to have an open heart when I serve. I'm able to go in and reform my mindset whenever I want to without a therapist or anything that I have to pay for holding me back. I'm able to cultivate a plant in my yard that can bring Rachel and I, my partner, closer together in a romantic way. I'm able to help my clients cure their own cancer with cannabis so they can grow in their own backyard. Like these results speak for themselves. I mean, if you really look at Bob Marley, for instance, that dude is the epitome of cannabis culture. And that dude changed the world with one love. And at the end of the day, when you look at that result versus the result of Bayer or any of these pharmaceutical industries, it's pretty easy to see what the truth really is because people can lie, they can manipulate, but results don't lie. And at the end of the day, when you see someone who's on a concoction of pharmaceuticals versus someone who utilizes cannabis, the difference is night and day. And results just don't lie. In a world where anything else can be fibbed, manipulated, whatever, the only thing that doesn't lie is being in person with someone, feeling their energy, seeing how healthy or unhealthy they are, seeing how vibrant their spirit is, how much they laugh. And what I've found is that the people that utilize cannabis, or at least have in their life some kind of plant medicine, maybe they do it every so often, maybe they did it in the past and they got what they needed and whatever, are always happier, more joyous, more connected to the world around them, more able to have difficult conversations in a calm manner than the people on the other side that are on SSRIs and stimulants and all those kind of things. And again, it's not to diss it, it's just to look at it objectively and say, like, what are the results showing us? And the results are showing that the mainstream media depiction is not accurate.
Well, and a lot of those pharmaceutical drugs that are out there may help somebody with whatever symptom that is that they have. But the reality is that drug is likely going to create yet another side effect problem that then the doctor's going to say, oh, you have a side effect of whatever that is. Here's something else that you need to take. So now
Mm-hmm.
you're not only taking one medication to fix a symptom, not even the root of really what's going on, but now you're taking a second or a third because of the side effects that the first one created. Side effects of cannabis, I might be a little thirsty. Holy
Yeah.
shit. I don't need to take any medication for that. Give me a glass of water.
Yeah, 100%, and it's funny you mentioned that too, because at the end of the day, you know, it's just it for anyone who's been around anyone that's on the pharmaceutical, like, you know, like kind of train, like my mother, for instance, she's been on it for years. First, it was, oh, you have depression, you need an SSRI. Then, because she stuffed all those emotions down, they manifested in their physical body
Yes.
and gave her back pain. And then
Yep.
she went back to the same doctor and they were like, oh my goodness, you have degenerative disc disease. You need opiates now. Okay, doctor, give me the opiates. Really, what she had was emotions manifesting into a physical disease. And at the end of the day, anything is repairable in the human body. We have people that have regrown their own tendons and organs based on intention. And that really happens, right? Like, go look for it. Don't believe anything I said, for anyone listening. But at the same time, when someone gets a diagnosis like that and they've been trained their whole life that the guy in the white lab coat or girl in the white lab coat has the answers for them, and they've been trained that all these diseases like cancer are just random, there's no way you can control them, they just randomly happen. And yeah, there are certain things you could do that maybe increase your risk, smoking, drinking, etc. But ultimately, there's nothing you can do about it. When you're trained like that your whole life, then you're going to go to this guy or girl in the white lab coat for any issue you have. You're going to outsource your entire health to them, which is the worst thing to delegate in the world, because you look at a lot of these doctors, like the last time I went to a primary care doctor, the guy was overweight trying to tell me about eating meat. I'm like, dude, look, results don't lie. I don't need to have any information from you. If you really knew what you think you knew, you wouldn't be overweight. Like, sorry, but not sorry. You're my doctor. So I
Yeah,
just stopped going to those people, because at the end of the day, if you can't get your own health in order, the fuck place do you think you have in teaching other people to do it? It's just so
exactly.
backwards, so backwards.
Yeah, I completely resonate with that. It's such a flawed system that they're not even taught that kind of stuff in medical school. I think that there's some genuine physicians and doctors out there that really do want to help people heal,
Mm,
right?
mm-hmm,
But unfortunately, the system that we're part of is not created to help people heal. It's
mm-hmm,
to help them not feel sick. And
mm-hmm.
that's not the same thing.
It's not.
It's again, we go back to the words right there. And you're a professional supposed to be here to help. If you can't take care of your health, how am I supposed to trust you with mine? But the fact of it is that we all have a perfectly made machine, that we're in this meat suit that has everything that we need. I'm breathing, I'm digesting, I'm detoxifying right now as we're having this conversation. I haven't thought about it for 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just getting out of our own way and listening to ourselves. And I guarantee you, anybody that's going in to talk to a doctor, they're not telling them absolutely everything,
God, no.
that's going on. So even that doctor, if they did want to have their best interests at heart, if they only have the information that you're giving them, they're
Mm-hmm.
not feeling those things in your body. They don't know that you're still suffering from that grief of the loss of your, whatever, or that breakup, or that childhood trauma, whatever that's trapped in your body. You're not talking about that stuff when you go talk to your primary care physician. And even if
Mm-hmm.
you did, they'd be like, yeah, you need to go see a therapist for that. That's not part of what I do here.
Mm.
Because I've only got 7 minutes until I see the next patient. So,
Mm-hmm. It's it's so true. And like you said, right? Like you called something really good forward here, which is like, we're not fat shaming, but at the end of the day, if I was going to learn how to drive a race car and I showed up to train and the person had never driven a race car, would I be upset or would I be happy about that? Now, if I'm learning guitar and I go spend a lot of money to book a guitar teacher and I show up and he's like, "Hey man, do you know how to do a G chord?" And I'm like, "Wait, I came to you to do that, right?" So like at the
yeah,
end of the day, being overweight is not healthy, no matter what the mainstream tries to tell any of us. I'm not here to judge anyone, but like if you think it's healthy, it's just not, right? So if I show up to a health office to get trained in health by someone, I expect them to look healthy. Like I don't think that's asking too much, right? And but yet in the world we're in, it's actually like most people don't think about that. They don't think about like,
yeah,
wait a minute, what are the results that this person who's telling me to do these things has themselves? Because if they don't have the pinnacle of health, they don't have the keys for me. And so, just like you said, there are some amazing doctors out there. I never like to generalize and say, oh, all of Western med is bad. There are aspects of Western med that are very useful for certain situations. God forbid you get in a car accident. A lot of Western med is great. But the challenge is that Western med has been placed in a place of preventative care and it sucks at that. It's
yeah,
reactive care. And it does pretty good at that in certain cases, right? You need to have an operation, you need to have a bone put back together, whatever it is. It's fantastic for that. But hopefully that should be 1% of each person's life that they need something like that. And if even that, right? So at the end of the day, what's the other 99%? It's preventative care that comes from Eastern medicine, all these other philosophies we're talking about, and nature, getting out in the sunlight, making sure you're not annihilating yourself with blue light by wearing glasses, these silly glasses that I wear, making sure that you're getting enough light that your body can go through mitophagy and autophagy and clean out mitochondria that are damaged, clean out cells that are damaged, make sure that you're spending time in community, laughing with friends, that you have a solid family unit and household. You're eating food that was grown in your local time zone, that's organic and regenerative. You're buying it from people who have love for the land, love for the animals. If you're eating animals, spring water right from the earth, it's been charged under the sun, under the moon. These things might sound all flashy and weird. This is literally the basics. This is the basics. Get outside, move your body, take some time alone every day, do something that makes you happy, and eat high quality food and drink high quality water. Like those are the basics. And yet, for so many, they're like, oh, well, I can't afford that. It's like, can you really not afford it? Or are you unaware of how much of a priority it really is because of how backwards our society is, I
yeah. You
mean,
can't afford not to.
yeah. And think of it this way. We're actually, Amanda, like, think about this. And this is like something I like to share with people because this is a good point of the conversation to say it. People right now are actually convinced that somehow a plant is bad on one imaginary line but not on another. Some people really believe that. The people that would listen to a conversation like this and say, oh, they're just getting high, are the people that actually believe that a plant is bad, dependent on what imaginary line it is. And that's the world we're living in. So the brainwashing and the programming goes very deep. And that's why I learned a long time ago there are my people and not my people. And I would never spend time trying to convince not my people to be my people when I could just hang out with my people. And the more that I'm just honest with myself and honest on podcasts and honest about exactly what I believe, what I know to be true subjectively for myself, and being not afraid to trigger the wrong people to get more of the right people in, the more I do that unabashedly, the more I'll have the right people around me, like yourself, like your listeners, and the wrong people, that's okay. They're great people. I'm not judging them, but I'm not the person for them. They'd waste their time around me. So I want them to
Yeah.
go find the person that's right for them. And the only way I do that is by being radically authentic. And cannabis is one of the things that taught me how to do that in an insane way, actually.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I love that so much. And there's also another category of people out there that are on their healing journey and their spiritual journey, and they know and understand the healing properties of plant medicine in general. And maybe they've heard about psilocybin or ayahuasca or whatever things out there and like the idea when they hear about the results that people have, but are still incredibly terrified to go into those spaces.
Mm.
And I can understand that. And for me, I feel like it's an opportunity for people that want to dive deeper. They want to take the airplane to California. They
Yeah.
don't want to spend another 20 years in therapy and retreats and whatever it is, but they're still terrified to go into a mushroom journey or
Mm.
ayahuasca or whatever, a different type of modality of plant medicine, which I can understand because those have their own purpose, right? And help different people in different ways. But what those do is they can kind of take you to a place where people feel much less in control, which honestly, if you have that kind of fear, you don't want to be out of control, you probably need to go into it,
Yeah,
honestly.
100%.
But if you want to just, tiptoe into the water, I feel like cannabis is such a great modality for people to try because number one, it is more readily available. And it is something that you can sit down in your own home. You're not having to go anywhere. You don't necessarily need anybody else there to watch over you and monitor you, make sure you're not gonna do something wild and crazy outside of yourself, right? That sometimes those modalities can make you feel a little bit different because you're
Mm.
kind of out there. And those are, whenever you have a mushroom journey, you really need to do some preparation for about a week before and some time after. And you need to allocate at least 4 to 6, 7, 8 hours, right? If talking about ayahuasca, you need to be preparing your body and your soul and your everything for a couple of weeks before, a few weeks after, dietary, all these different things that kind of go into that. And this is the modality that you can do in a short amount of time, safely in your own home. You don't have to go to Costa Rica, all of the different pieces. Like it is something that's just here and available. Like you said, it's grown in all these places around the world for a reason.
Mm. Yeah, 100%. Does nature make mistakes?
No,
Like, so it's like, why would it be growing everywhere? And also, why would plant medicines, psychedelics, be some of the hardiest medicines and hardest to get rid of medicines in the world? Ayahuasca, it's a vine, it grows through cement. Cannabis is a vine that also grows, or a weed, if you want to call it that grows through cement. Mushrooms grow out of shit, so good luck stopping those, right? Like, there's a reason these things are put in places that you can never get rid of them because they
yeah,
must be very important. Because once again, like, if they weren't, how many different plants have gone extinct? How many animals have gone extinct, etc.? These are literally not able to go extinct because they grow in so many different areas of the planet. And, at the end of the day, you know, it's kind of funny how we think about, or not we, but, a group of people anyway, think about the past or think about our ancestors as like, oh, they were like playing with sticks and rocks. Like they weren't evolved. They were much more evolved than we were in a right brain, more spiritual, connected to everything state. I mean, the animists, from thousands of years ago believed that everything was alive. And so we're kind of returning to that now in a way. People are starting to get there with holism, as Jamie Wheel calls it. But at the end of the day, these people, even though they might not have had iPads, they were connected to the earth. They knew how to talk to the water. They knew how to do all these kind of things that seem so woo-woo today. But at the end of the day, even science says we only see 4% of visible reality. So 96% of what's known to be there, we can't see with our naked eye. But we're also in a time of reductionism and scientific materialism, where a lot of people, if I talk about cannabis's ability to open your heart, let's say, or I even talk about chakras or whatever, there'll be that person like, huh, show me the science. And what I like to tell them is, okay, so you only believe in what you can see and measure. Cool. Do you love someone in your life? Do you love two people in your life? How many units of love for each person do you have? And they're like, well, I can't measure it. I'm like, but you still know it exists, right? That's what qualitative right brain science is all about. We don't need to necessarily be able to measure something with an instrument like our eyeballs that only see 4% of what's there anyway to understand there's something there that we're experiencing. And, I'm at a point now, Amanda, probably similar to you, where when people are like, I don't believe that, I'm like, cool, that's your myth. Abracadabra. the all is mine. So you get to believe whatever you want to believe is God and drag in this lifetime. We all do. And at the end of the day, nothing is inherently right or wrong because duality is not real. But whatever leads you to more desirable results is like God playing one big game of warm or colder with you. And I know for me, the reason I keep going in this direction is because when I hang out with cannabis people and I've created this business and all this stuff, holy shit, it feels amazing. When I used to be in school for psychology and training to be a therapist and having to put on these tight belts and khakis to look all professional. So stupid. None of that stuff made any sense to me. I'm like, I'd much rather be athletic as hell. I'd rather be outside most of the day. I'd rather have a tan. I'd rather wear loose fitting clothing that I can move around in. It didn't make any sense to me. So I just took this other path because it felt better. And that's why I keep going there. And I think that's what everyone is the potential everyone has, put it that way, is to simply follow what feels fun to them and have enough courage and bravery to know it's going to get you to the exact right places with the right people doing the right things. But, at the end of the day, there's always the quote unquote safe bet, which is actually the least safe bet, but the paved path or whatever. And, if people want to take that, they can. But, at the end of the day, I think plant medicine is specifically for people that are looking to shake things up, that know there's more here than meets the eye. And they're like, I need to defrag this computer in my mind that's got tons of malware and viruses on it from how I was raised, the schools I was in, things like that. I think the more that people start to tap into that we've been lied to insanely is the more they'll start tapping into like, okay, let me just defrag this entire thing through plant medicine or whatever it is. But it's a very interesting time to be alive. And I'm very grateful to live in today's world because it's such an interesting dichotomy between, some people that see the world as a big entertainment show. We live in a dream. None of this is real. And the people that really believe everything is real and try to white knuckle it, need to be right about things. That's why for me, I'm like, I don't care if people like cannabis or not. I just like it for me. That's all I know. And if people end up liking it, cool, let's have a conversation about it. If they don't, cool, let's talk about it. I'm not going to try to convince anyone anymore because nothing's for everyone. So at the end of the day, if it's not their lifetime to experiment with it, or if they've already experimented with it, cool. I just don't want people putting out lies about it. That's the
That's
thing,
so true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, if you have a fear about it, is it really your own fear, or is it one that's been given to you by the government or your parents?
I tell people all the time, I don't care if you like cannabis or not. I just want you to come to that conclusion solely on your own. I don't
Yeah.
want you to parrot all the propaganda we already outlaid here. Like, you sure you want to say that that's why you think cannabis is bad? 'Cause that's kind of got racist roots to it. You sure you want to side with that? It's like if you
Yeah.
want to go on PubMed and look up its role in cancer, cell death and all these things, and then you still come to a point that you don't like it, cool. By all means, you got free will. But don't go around parroting things in life. You're not a parrot. You're your own human being. Oh, like form your own belief systems. As Carl Jung said, there's a time where we must clean up, show up, and grow up and become individuated and stop just taking what other people say as gospel, but actually start critically thinking. And that's why most people don't do it, because it actually takes courage to question your own beliefs and ask yourself why you believe what you believe and make sure it's actually what you believe and not just what someone told you to believe. That's very important.
Yeah. And have you ever even tried it or experimented with it?
I'm glad you brought attention to that. I just wanted to say real quick because that's one of my ultimate biggest pet peeves is like I tell everyone like the challenge, one of the challenges in today's world is that people think that book smart is real life experience and street smarts. So they'll go to school and let's say they wanted to like understand an apple. They'll go take 4 years of education on pectin, the different varieties of apples, how they're grown, the soil mixtures, and they'll end up thinking they understand apples. Where me, on the other hand, I'll just go take an apple, bite it, and I'll understand more than they'll ever understand of just book smarts. But the way that book smarts does help is if I eat an apple and I'm like, that was the best experience ever. Why was that so good? Now let's go look into the books and back the experience up with information. But people are putting the cart before the horse. How many people that are like, well, I read in school. I'm like, really? The schools that were created by pharmaceutical industries, those schools? You sure? Did you ever just try it? Did you smoke it and not die, not
Yeah.
freak out and just realize, relax, that's not what you were told it was?
The interesting part about what we just said was that even you tasting the apple and asking like, why did that taste so good? And like some of the questions of the why,
Mm.
some of those questions people aren't asking when they're just gaining information and reading books.
Yeah.
But the cannabis, she'll put you into a state to
Hmm.
start asking questions and start digging in and understanding, which is incredibly powerful.
Well, I mean, and I'm so glad you brought this up too. What a great point, because, in school isn't there to teach you how to think. It's there to teach you what to think. And
Yes.
that's because they want people that are easily controllable. They want worker bees that when they come out and say, "Oh my God, there's this virus and you need to get a vaccine," everyone's like, "Oh my God, roll up my sleeves. Let me, the same guy that created AIDS, just put fucking stuff in my arm." They don't want people to critically think, because those of us that do connect with psychedelics and have had a mindset of like question everything, we could have just looked around at the energy and seen the results of, like, the people that are 300 pounds on the health screen being like, "This is good for your health," and be like, that person doesn't understand health. Therefore, their advice means nothing to me.
Yeah.
But again, if, people can't critically think like that, they're a lot more easily controllable.
What a great topic and conversation we've had today. Thank you so much, Ryan. What would you advise for people that do have some more questions? Where do they need to find you and the programs and stuff that you offer where they could learn a little bit more?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say, Amanda, thank you so much for having me on. You're a great host, and I love dialoguing, and that's my favorite style of podcast. So, Game Recognized Game for putting together something
Yay.
great here. And if people want to find me, they can find me on Instagram at the real Ryan Sprague. My last name is Sprague. Spoiler alert: there is another Ryan Sprague out there who's awesome. He's on Ancient Aliens and the host of Mysteries Decoded. I ended up reaching out to him when I found that out. I'm like, "Sorry about the name. You're equally real." But what an interesting synchronicity of name science there.
Yeah.
But you can always reach out to me on Instagram. I take a lot of pride in getting back to anyone who reaches out to me. Just give me about 24 to 48 hours. Sometimes my messages get a little crazy, but reach out with any questions you have. I have a lot of different things on there that you can find more info about. The main things I'm doing right now in terms of courses and certs and things of that nature. We'll be doing our next enrollment for the Coach with Cannabis certification program in about 2 months. We'll be hosting a big workshop around that. So just keep your eyes peeled for that. We're going to be having on May 3rd a Breathe with Cannabis workshop come up that I believe will only be $1. So for anyone who wants to experience cannabis as a psychedelic, because if you listen to this episode and you're like, "I don't believe it's really like that," I don't want you to. Come out of the event, go through it, and you come away with your own conclusion. I never want anyone to take what I say and just use it as gospel, because that's what I think the issue with the world is, like we talked about. So
Yeah.
that'll be a great opportunity for anyone who's interested to dive into this and just see what it's all about. It's a 2.5 hour live ceremonial cannabis and breathwork experience, and you will find it is extremely powerful. And we'll be starting our next 8-week cohort of the Breathe with Cannabis Limitless program after that. And other than that, that's pretty much it. You can check out the two podcasts, this one time on psychedelics and the Highly Optimized podcast, which I'll be restarting in the next month or so. And that's where you can find me, check out everything I'm doing, and stay up to date with everything I got going on. So thank you again, Amanda. It's been a blast.